welcome to the Wednesday webinar. Once again, my name is Michael Wimberly, and today we will be dealing with supplier management inside of Windchill. Once again, expanding extending the manufacturing readiness into the supply chain. So we're going to hit a couple of things today in this particular webinar. So of course, we'll go through the the normal introductions. Once again, who am I? Who is PDS Vision? We'll talk about the challenge. We'll discuss the business impact, and then basically, how do we go through and enable the things that we're going to be talking about. I'll do a quick demo. Then we'll go through some of the getting ready steps. So basically, what needs to be in place in order to take advantage of the tools that we're going to be showing, and then of course the next steps and any Q&A. As you guys have already seen, if you do have questions, please put them in the question box. I will address those at the end of the webinar. So once again, as they come up, go ahead and type them in and we'll go through and get those answered for you throughout the webinar. Maybe I'll answer them through the webinar directly or indirectly. All right, so once again, my name is Michael Wimberly. I'm a digital transformation architect here at PDS Vision. I've been here for over 13 years now. I've been working with PTC products for over 25 years. I've been in the PTC channel, basically as a VAR, working for VARs for over 20 years. And through that time, I've been a PTC certified trainer, as well as an implementer of Creo, as well as Windchill. PDS Vision as a whole, of course, we are a global company that we have offices in multiple countries. As you can see on the board, I'm sorry, on the slide, we were founded in 2008, and we have, once again, over 220 employees across the world. And with that, we have over 350 of those are actually technical expertise. So once again, we focus on the knowledge of the software. We have a great sales team, but we also pride ourselves in our technical team because we have a great focus on the implementation and the usage of the actual software. And then we also have over 30 technical partners that we use to help get you the information you need. So if there's something that PTC doesn't offer directly, we do have partnerships with other organizations to kind of get you where you need to be. All right. So we are in the webinar series currently. We are on the 4th of this webinar series, which is once again supplier management inside of Windchill. The next one that we have will not be until June 1st, and that goes into connecting Windchill to ERP. So that one, once again, will be on June 1st. If you haven't signed up for it already, you can. I don't know if I think some people have signed up for the entire series, which is great. We appreciate that. But once again, the next one is the connecting of the Windchill with ERP. All right, so moving forward, when supplier and part data is hard to find, engineering teams create duplicates, which makes ill-informed decisions and sourcing more demanding. So we know just going in and finding data, if it's supplier data, if it's just our data as a whole, sometimes instead of continuing to search for this particular item, it's easier for engineers to just go in and say, okay, I'm just going to do it again. Or I'm going to do it not knowing there's already 3 versions of that same item inside of Windchill. So the result is more time wasted because now we've gone through and duplicated the effort, poor decisions, because maybe the item that we already had the appropriate supplier on it, had the appropriate documentation associated with it, and now we have to go through and figure all that stuff out again. And once again, all of those I's have been dotted and T's have been crossed. And then, of course, once again, higher cost before release, because now, once again, we're duplicating effort. Something's already been done, or if we are working with a supplier, then with that supplier, we already have a different supplier that's giving us a better rate because we're ordering more quantities. So those things can also affect us as well, giving us more cost. So the common challenges that we have is, once again, engineers struggle to find approved as well as reusable parts. That is one of the big things that we run into. That's why a lot of organizations, when it comes to Creo, they have four different versions of the same screw. But the thing is, they're all named differently. They all have different part numbers, but it's the exact same file. Duplicate parts are created because creation is easier than reuse. Supplier information is disconnected from the design process because, once again, if we're now duplicating if something is already there and that item has already been approved, now we are duplicating that effort, or once again delaying the overall process in order to move that design forward. And then engineering and sourcing teams work from different data and different priorities. Pretty straightforward there, because once again, now it's just a disconnect. We've been talking with our PLM environment is basically getting everybody on the same page, working with the same data inside of the same environment. Once again, the single source of all of the information. And now we have a single source, but now it's harder to kind of go through and find some of those similar to or same as type objects. So the business impact is, once again, time. Engineers waste time searching for parts and supplier data, while late sourcing visibly delays decisions and projects. Also, costs, duplicate parts, and poor sourcing decisions increase design, procurement, and inventory and downstream costs. So once again, there's that disconnect. We're reinventing the wheel when it's already there. Quality, using unproven parts or undesired suppliers increase product and supplier risk. So, as I was just mentioning before, we already have that item that we're outsourcing or that we're buying from a particular vendor. Well, we know who that vendor is. We have an agreement with that vendor. We know that their quality is good. Somebody else goes in and creates that exact same file, but now they're using a different vendor because that different vendor could get it to us, quote unquote, quicker, but in doing that, not the quality always isn't the same as what we're already getting. And then, of course, revenue issues found too late disrupt release plans, delay time to market, and reduce delivery predictability. So now, once again, let's go back to that quality issue. Quality is always an important part. So because the quality isn't as well as good as the other approved object, now we put it in our assembly, something breaks, something doesn't work, something doesn't function properly. So now we've got to basically go back and figure things out again. So once again, because of that delay, of course, our revenue drops because now we're delaying the time to market, we're delaying getting these changes, these updates out to the customers. So what does a good supplier environment look like? Well, of course, one of the things is easy retrieval of existing parts. We know they're there. Give us an easy way to go through and find them. Also, supplier data is visible to the end user. So when you're looking at it, you already know, okay, here is this engine, here's this, I'm sorry, this motor, here are the hardware, here's the bearings, all this stuff that we may do, whether it's commercial or, once again, something that we're building, but we know who we're buying it from, we know the part number that we're going to actually use, and we know who not to use. So we can also go through and set those up as well. Controlled introduction of suppliers. So when we go through into Windchill and we're actually setting up suppliers, we can have a standard process that we go through and validate a supplier with. So we can go through and validate that they're good before we make them available and basically give their status as to their, whether they're new, they're still being reviewed, whatever it may be. And then, of course, teams working on the same data. As we mentioned before, that is the concentration or the focus of this entire PLM series is everybody working from the same set of data instead of being, everybody siloed and working on different stuff. We want to make sure that everybody's seeing the exact same thing at the exact same time. So, how do we get there? Well, the two main things that we're going to look at in this session is supplier management and part classification. So supplier management is where we're now going to go through and define who the suppliers are. We're going to go through and assign what we call approved manufacturing and approved vendor lists. So we have those individuals that we're buying it from, the approved product and who we're going to buy that product from. And then we're also going to look at part classification to allow us to easily find the information that we're looking for. So we're going to go in and define things using classification. So it is a piece of hardware. Okay, what kind of hardware is it? It's a boat. Okay, what kind of boat? It's a quarter 20. So we can use that information to go through and find things very easily by simply using the part classification options. So with that, we're kind of looking at here. So we're going to jump into the supplier management piece of it as well. So as I mentioned before, we're going to look at the approved manufacturing list and approved vendor list to go through and define and manage the relationships between our supplier parts and then our actual internal parts. We're going to manage the supplier profiles. We're going to define their contexts as far as the information that they're going to be associated with, standardize on new component supplier, as I mentioned before, and check supplier part preferences to optimize component and supplier selection. So, and I'll show you in the demonstration, we can also go through and set it up for customers that, okay, here is they're approved. We can have one that is a preferred vendor, and then we can also have one that we basically designate as a do not use. So we have different statuses that we can do. Now, what you're looking at in the image on the right side of the screen is you have two different versions of this laptop. Looks like one is a more robust in the field type laptop, and another one will be more of a desktop like laptop. Now, what we're doing in the defining is we have the approved information and we have the preferred information. So going down the list, you can see in the part one, you have the part A, part B, and part C. Those are all approved to be used in that particular laptop. But when you go to part B is not approved, nor all, or sorry, part P2 is not approved or do not use for that particular laptop. So we can go through and designate, okay, here is the BOM information, here is this part with this subassembly. We don't use that for this version of that particular assembly. And you can see on the left side, I'm sorry, on the right side of that with the preferred listing, you have the preferred, but then you have some specific do not use objects inside of there. So you can do it for the top level, you can do it for the individual items underneath it, depends on how you want to go through and set all of that up. But we're able to go through and display that information inside of Windchill and even go through and export that out inside of an Excel spreadsheet that we may use for ERP integration. So here's a very simple um, overview as well. At the top left, we see commercial buy parts. So we actually have the actual part file. And then underneath there, you see the approved manufacturing list and you see the approved vendor list. So the approved manufacturer list is basically who the actual manufacturing of the file is. The vendor is who do we buy that file from. So this is an approved part. Great. We're going to go ahead and use that. But now who do we purchase that from? We purchase it from A, B, or C. So we can go through and now designate those items. So once again, do not use approved as well as preferred. So we can set those up. The next one on the right of that is make parts. With the make parts, we can also go through and designate that this is a make part and simply who are we actually buying this part from. So we don't have the manufacturer. We're making this in our environment, or we're saying here's a casting that this vendor is actually making for us. So we just simply go through and define it that way. So that's where you have the difference between make and buy parts, is that when you're doing a buy, you're going in and defining the manufacturer and who are you buying that part from. From a make part, we're just simply going in and defining who the vendor is, who's making this casting for us. We can go through and define that. And then as you go down in some of the other sub windows, you can see, we can go through and define approved manufacturing list. So you can see their information. You can see the actual part numbers that we define them. We can define the manufacturing part number or the customer part number, sourcing context. We'll get into some of this as we go into the demo. And then one of the important parts is on the right side when we're looking at this overall display. As you can see, it goes through and shows you basically underneath the sourcing status is there's no approved manufacturing list. You can see things as preferred, you can see things as do not use. So all those labels we can go through and define inside of each of the items that we're actually working on. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump into a demonstration. All right. So the first thing we're going to go in and deal with is the actual part classification. So we're going to go through and actually find files. So by going in and using part classifications, what you will see is when you go into the search tab, you still have your saved search information. That's all still there. You still have your advanced search where you can go through and now categorize and even use some of the attributes that you define as search criteria. But then we also have a classification explorer. So we can go through and set up classifications. Now, this is once again one of those PLM type things, and we're using WT parts. So this is where all of that information now begins to grow. So this isn't directly associated to a CAD file. The CAD file can be associated with the WT part file, but all this information that we're collecting or that we're using is directly associated with the WT part files. So we've gone over here, we created classifications. So the top level classification that we're looking at is this a chemical item, an electrical item, a mechanical item, or is it software? What we're looking at here in the icons are the same things that we're looking at over here on the left side underneath parts. So you can see underneath there, there's a total of 319 objects. And as you look at each one of those sub objects, you can see how many are underneath each one. So as we go in and we look at expand electrical, we can see the different categories for electrical. As we go through each board, we can expand those and see, okay, those are the three types of boards that are there. Same thing with mechanical. We can expand mechanical and see the different areas that the mechanical has actually gone in and defined as well. So each one of those has an additional expansion underneath them as well. So I'm doing it here on the left side. I can just as easily do it from selecting on anything in the icons. So all of these are active links. So if I know from a mechanical standpoint, I'm looking for a bearing, I can come over here and directly select on bearings, and it'll go through and give me linear bearings, roller bearings, standard bearings, or thrust bearings. You can see each one of those. Now, if I'm okay and want to look at all of them, I can just simply execute search right here, and it'll go through and show me all those bearings that fit that category. Now, only thing that's bringing up after that is I want to filter it a little bit more. Okay, now just show me roller bearings. And now it goes in and now reduces it to just roller bearings. So these are always active on the left side of the screen to go through and use as filters for our items. So I can come back up here, and as you can see, there are the different categories that we will go through and use. So once again, what we're defining here is things that we define based on the categories that we want to go through and group our files with. So we're going to create this classification structure. Now, once again, this is a one-time thing that we're going to go through and do. So yes, it will take a minute just for you to go through and actually set it up, but the end result of this is going to be great when you're actually done with it. So we can come back in, and I want to go in and find what am I looking for? A screw. So for this screw, I want to go through and find the hex head screws, and there's everything there. Now, same thing here. You can see all the information. And if you do scroll a little bit over to the right, you can see all of the pertinent information that we've told it to define. So you can see the drive type, you can see the overall length, you can see the maximum drill thickness, the thread diameter, and even the classification that we've gone through and set up. So all of this is all defined here. As we stated once again, the information is here. So when we go through and now we want to filter it, maybe we're not looking for everything from basically an inch to 4 inches. That's not everything that we want to see. So we can go through and define what is the minimum range, what's the maximum range. So we can reduce this down by either using the drag handles here or once again, typing in the value here. So I'm going to take this down to there and I'll say apply. And now it goes in and reduces that number by whatever fits that category. So give me a length underneath this particular value. I didn't give it a minimum value, I gave it a maximum value. But I can do either one of them. I can filter this down and say anything over, and I'm not sure if it's anything there, but we'll find out. Filter it down, and then now we're finding anything between 40 and 68. And once again, when we're looking at the overall length, that's what we're looking at here. So it's allowing us to see the information inside of this display. So clear all that out. So now we see everything again, and I'll just go back up to the part classification again. And then I can come over here and, oh, there is one other thing I wanted to show. Sorry. Inside of here, so this is where that data reuse comes in as well. So if I come over here and I'm going to select on this file here, I'm going to right click, and let's just say I filtered it down to this specific one. I want to go in and find similar objects. So what I'm able to do here is saying, okay, here is this file, and I want to go in and find something similar to it. And once again, we can define what that similarity is. So when I select on similar objects, I get this dialog box up. Now I can go through and use any of this information on the left side to go through and define what the similarity is that I'm looking for. Is it length? So is the diameter okay? Yeah, is the diameter okay? We just want to go in and find something within that same length value, or do we want to go in and find something diameter similar to? Whatever it is we want to go through and specify, we can do it here. So let's go ahead and say length, and we can say plus or minus. And once again, not knowing exactly everything, I'm going to do plus and minus. That's a little much. I'll just do 10, and I'll tell it to go through and find, and it finds a similar to object. If I expand that out, let's see if I'll get a little bit more. Yeah. So it's going in, and everything else should be the same. The only thing that is changing is I'm looking for something that is basically lengthwise. So it all falls within that same category of this length, plus or minus 20. So I can go through and specify that as well. So this is one of those areas where, yeah, I'm looking for this part, but I'm looking for some, I want to see if there's another version of this that is the exact same one, or that once again, plus or minus, you know, 5 millimeters, half inch, whatever it is we want to go through and define, give me that. So I don't go through and create something brand new. I can go through and now use these categories or these classifications and actually be able to gather similar objects. So I'm not reinventing the wheel. Hey, can I use this part that is just a little bit longer or a little bit shorter? Does this work? Does it have the same properties as what I'm actually currently working on? So I can go through and use that information as well. All right. So now, once again, I'm going to come back up. I'm going to go into, once again, searching for different objects, whether you go through and you pick on the screen, whatever it may be, there are my resulting objects here. Now for this one, I'm now going to transition a little bit. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go directly into this file. Now, while I'm in this file, one of the things I do want you to see is that one of the things that has been defined with that is a part classification. Now, this one already has it. One of the things that you're able to do, I'll just come back into here real quick. One of the things that you're able to do is that if you actually are creating a new part, so maybe you're going in and just creating your structure, you can go in and create a new part. One of the options underneath your parts will be part classification. So now I can go through and say where this part categorically fits. So under mechanical, okay, this is going to be an O-ring and it's going to be a square profile O-ring. So I can go through and set that up as I'm going in and defining that part. If I did not define that at that moment, I can come over here and I'm just going to select on, I'm probably going to select the one that already has it. I'm going to select on this file here. Yep, you can see this part does not have a part classification. So what I'm able to do is go ahead, I'm going to do a checkout and edit. And then inside of this dialog box, once again, I have the ability to define where that part is classified in. So I can then go through and set that up as well. So I am giving this file its classification. So as I'm going into defining that, and I'll go through, I think this was a screw. It'll work for now. Now, what happens once I've defined that, one of the other things that gets set up is now the part classification attributes. So what information am I now going to go in and fill in? Material tapping type, so on and so forth. So I can go through and now fill in this information associated with the actual creation of that file or the updating of that file. So it gives me the categories that I need to go through and fill in so they appropriately or can be appropriately used when we're going in and defining the actual classification of the files. All right, so I'm going to go back to my Rivet. And then once again, we have that information here. Now, shifting just a little bit. So we have the information on this Rivet, but one of the things that's important is when we actually are ready to go through and purchase this Rivet, who do we buy it from? So inside of here, we have this AML, sorry, AVL, which is approved manufacturer and an approved vendor list. So we can see inside of this file that we actually, the manufacturer of this file is Acme Fasteners, and the vendor that we buy it from is McMaster-Carr. So we can go through and set that up so that once again, as we're going in and looking at this information, we know who to buy this file from or this object from. So we can go and define that. Now, the other thing that's beneficial is, as I mentioned before, if I come over and I look at my where used, I can see that this thing is using a bunch of assemblies. I'm just going to go through and select this top level one and then look at its structure. When you look at the structure, you can see this is that rivet, and you can see that it has a preferred reference. Now, what is that preferred item? I can come over and select and say show, and I have that one selected, AMV AVL. And now I can see that this rivet is Acme and I'm purchasing it from McMaster-Carr. And you can see the categories that each one of those are preferred. Acme is preferred, McMaster-Carr is also preferred. So pretty straightforward. Now, the other thing that we can do is we have this down here at the bottom, we have this clip that's also created, but this one does not have anything associated with it yet. So I'm going to come over and select on this, and I'm going to go to its AML section, and you can see there's nothing listed up here at the top. Now, what we can do are two things. If one of two things, I should say. So if this does not have the information, so we haven't defined the manufacturer for this item, we haven't defined the vendor that we're going to purchase this item from. So we can come over here and do that brand new. So I can come over and select on this object and then tell it, yep, I'm going to go through and define the manufacturer first. And I'm just going to put something in here just so I can show you the listing. That's there. I can set that up from here. If that's what I decided not to do, I can also come over here. If we already have it defined, now we want to go through and use the existing ones that we defined. So we can go through and say add existing manufacturing part. So I can come over here, same thing. What is the part, the actual manufacturing part? So because I already have it created, I'm just going to come over here and use clip, and it's going to find that fastener that I've defined for that. If I didn't know what it was, of course, I can go through and always use a wildcard character, and it'll go through and give me a bunch of them. And I just simply have to filter through everything. I'll just use this table here and still type in clip and filter that down to the one that I actually need. So now this is the information that the actual clip is made from Acme Fastener. Awesome. Now, I can also specify whether or not this is an object that we're going to use. So here's the options that we have. Do not use, approve, and preferred. So we may be putting something in the database that we don't want people to use. Don't use this file from this manufacturer. So we can set that up and then associate it appropriately to the BOM or to the original um, part object that we have, and making sure that we're not going in and associating or buying something that has not been approved. So this one, I'm going to go ahead and say that this object has been approved. Now what I'm going to go through and define is who do we buy it from? So we know who the manufacturer is, but now we want to say, okay, we know that we want that from Acme Fastener, but who do we purchase that object from? So inside of here, same thing. I can come over and now add my vendor part. So what vendor am I going to use? I'm going to come over once again, do a wildcard character for this one. Now for this one, I'm actually going to pick two different companies. So I'm going to pick Walmart as one, and I'm going to pick Fastenal as the other one. Now they're both there. Now by default, they're also both selected as do not use. Well, Walmart is the one that we don't want to use. We do want to use the Fastenal, so I'm going to go in and select on that and say modify the vending part source status. I'm going to change that from do not use. I can either do approved or preferred, depending on how you. If I have multiple, then maybe I would go through and have one or two of them that are approved, but this is the preferred one that we use. So if it's just one, it doesn't really matter which one you're selecting because they pretty much mean the same thing. So I'm just going to use approved just so we see labeling different when we're looking at our BOM. So we have one listed that do not use. We have another one listed as approved. Now at that point, I will finish. And now you can see underneath this clip, we have two listings. It's the same manufacturing file, but now there's two different vendors associated with it. So yes, you can buy this, or I'm sorry, it is available at Walmart, but that's not who we buy it from. We do buy this fastener from Fastenal. And then once again, we would have the appropriate information for that. Now, this is the benefit of all that as well, is that the vendor is Fastenal. So when I select on them, I can see the other supply items that we buy from them, as well as the overall details of them. So this is also where we can now go through and give scores to our vendors as well. So as we're setting them up, we can actually go through and give them scores for audit findings. Did we find anything that was irregular? How many non-conformance things that we find? On-time delivery, what's the overall price ranking? Corrective action, so on and so forth. So we can go through and actually give them a score based on those categories. So then we can go through and figure out, okay, what is the preferred vendor for this particular object? Is it available from multiple vendors? If it is, which one gives us the best quality information? Now we all know sometimes, I don't know how it happens, but we can actually order the same part from two different vendors and the quality for some reason is a little different. I don't know why that happens, but it's the same part, but yeah, quality of the two may be a little bit different. And that's why we're saying don't buy it from here, make sure we buy it from here. Now, the benefit once again is now when we go through and we look at that assembly, actually I might as well just go this right there. When we look at that assembly, now when we're looking at it, we can see that this also has an approved listing. So if I come over to this one and say, okay, now show me its approved manufacturing vending list, you can actually see that now it shows both of those. So here is the manufacturing part itself. And then here are the vendors that we do or do not buy them from. And then if there's other items that we have, for example, I'm just going to select everything up here. And oh, let's also back up just a little bit, because remember I told you there's a difference between make and buy. The items that I've been working on are buy objects, which means there is an actual manufacturer and then a vendor that we're buying it from. When we're dealing with more of like our castings and things like that, then we just have a vendor. We don't have a manufacturing because it's being built from scratch. So you may have some of those up here. I can't remember if I have it or not. That may actually have, yeah, like this one. You know, we may have one that's a manufacturer, and I don't know why we're doing it from Walmart, but Walmart is the preferred vendor for that particular object. So if it's a manufacturing, or once again, if it is a make object, that's actually happened to be a buy, sorry. But if we do have a make object, then the same thing goes. We can go into this particular file. I'm just going to go to the information for it. And then the same thing inside of here. Now we're just going to go through and define who is the actual vendor that we're going to go through and buy it from. So with that, come over here. We are doing in a vendor, and this is going to give us the vendor information. And now we go through and specify who we're actually going to go through and make this for us. So all of that is there. Now, once again, the benefit of all of this is that this information, as we see it, can then be exported. So I can come over here, do my report, and do a report that shows multi-level with approved vendor and approved manufacturing list. So now we can go through and actually see this information, and we can see once again at the bottom, there is that exact information that we wanted. And now we can go through and now export this as one of those object types or file types. So we have it all there. And once again, this is now where we have that connection with purchasing. We can have that connection with manufacturing. We can have that connection with our ERP environment. Any of that information that we want to go through and translate from one to the other, we now have that information inside of our Windchill environment as well. So this is now where we can sync up those two objects, as far as, yes, we found the files, which is great. So we use the classification to find the files. Not only did we find the files, but now we also see where we should purchase the file from. So I'm not reinventing the wheel. I found what I needed. Oh, I created this one. Is there something similar to it? Okay, similar to, okay, here's another one. Great. Here's where we buy it from. Here's a vendor. Here's the other stuff we buy from that vendor. So there's so much information that we can go through and gather from within inside of our environment, just by going in and selecting and viewing the different object types. So once again, it's a combination um, of course, as I mentioned before, the classification searching, using this, going up and setting up classifications, as well as once we have the objects, we can then go in and actually specify what the information, the critical information is as far as purchasing those items are for. So as I said, now we're at, you'll hear me continue to mention, the more you put in, the more you get out. And this is one of those scenarios where this is critical information. We need to know that. So we can create a bill of material that has all that critical information in there, including the vendor part number. So when I'm going in and purchasing this from McMaster-Carr, I know that this is the part number that I'm ordering directly from McMaster-Carr that is associated with this object. So that's where all these things once again loop together. And as I mentioned before, um, that information can be exported into that bill of material and once again used in whatever application that we want to, or as, because we're looking at one source, give your marketing department, give your purchasing department, give, you know, all the manufacturing, give them access to Windchill, and they can go in and look at this stuff themselves. You don't have to print it out. You just simply let them know it's available through a workflow, you know, giving them a notification that, hey, bill of material is done, properties have been assigned, go and look at X, Y, and Z. So we can still keep all that information. That way we don't have a quote unquote uncontrolled document that now comes out of the Windchill environment. And as soon as it comes out of the Windchill environment, it becomes an uncontrolled document, which means it could differ from what's inside the system. And then, as I mentioned before, we can continue to go through and update this. So for this one right here, if I decided that I wanted to go through and add to this or remove from this, I could come over here and say, okay, I want to edit this. Oh, that's the status. Sorry. I could go through and actually, it's over here, update and then add another vendor to this. So if we figured out that, yes, this vendor is good, but we also got good quality from this one, we can then go through and add that vendor. Or we found out that this is a vendor that we did get it from because they got it to us quicker, but the quality wasn't as good. So now we can go through and add another vendor and basically say do not use. So we can continue to go through for this particular file. Yeah, we can purchase it from how we have the ability to purchase from multiple vendors. Which one do we want? Once again, preferred, approved, do not use. You can have as many in here as you want to that corresponds with what you have inside of your database. All right. And then the last thing I want to show you is also with inside of Creo. And this is real simple. I just want to show you that once again, that search criteria that we went in and defined, we can go through and use that inside of here as well. Now, we're not going to bring it directly into Windchill, but as I mentioned before, we can still go through and use that same search criteria. There it is. Use that exact same search criteria to go through and find whatever we want. So we know that what we're looking for is, it's a hex head bolt. All right, great. The hex head bolt that we want is actually going to be a flange head bolt. So we can go through and specify that as well. So we have this information in here that we can go through and use. Same thing, diameter, we can go through and specify any of that we want. And then we can go through, let me make sure I find the appropriate one. Nope, I think I picked the wrong listing. We want the bolts, X bolts. That was flange head. Let's see, it's not giving me the part number. Actually, let me just do this. So I can use this inside of here. Now, the thing that's not happening here, and I'm going to back up because it's not going to give me my part number that I'm looking for. Let's go bolts. And I'm going to do search here. And then the bolt that I'm looking for is, let's see, 786. And it's not in there. I just had it. I told you. I swear to you guys, I just had it. I'm going to come all the way up to here. And execute that search. And then once again, I'm going to look for 786. It's got to be in there. There it is. All right. So this is the bolt that I was looking for. Once again, I did the part number, but we can still go through and use any of this information that we found. Length, diameter, whatever it is we want to go in the search by. Now from here, I can select on this and say add to workspace. Now, of course, this is WT part, so it doesn't actually, it's not the actual CAD file, but I can select on it and tell it to collect this related CAD file. And now that file is going to be added to my workspace. And then inside of my Creo, I can then go through and assemble that in. I can still use the tools, and I apologize I didn't use it appropriately. I was trying to rush through it. But I could go through and use the tools to go through and define the information. Put that up so I can see it. Change that from distance to coincident, and then also take that and flip it. Wonderful. So same thing, as I mentioned before, we can go through and use the tools inside of here to go through and use our classification search. Once again, I know that I'm looking for a bolt, I'm looking for a hex head bolt, so on and so forth. So I can go through and use any of that. And once again, once you get to that top level area, you can go through and now select on the search, and there's the item that you want. I know I'm looking for this particular bolt type, so I can use that as well. All right. So last thing I want to do is hit a couple more slides, and then we will call it complete. All right. So once again, what does this mean in practice? It basically means it increases the part reuse. That's one of the biggest things that I know customers have, is that I want to reuse something instead of going in and duplicating it every time. We need this size bearing. We need this size washer. We need this engine. We need this motor. We need all these different things. Didn't we buy that already? I think we did, but I don't know where it is. Those part classifications with all of the different attributes that we've gone through and defined, the motor speed, motor size, mounting holes, whatever you want to go through and specify, those things can be set up, and that can be information that we use to filter. Reduce duplication, very important, because once again, duplication means we're buying things in fewer quantities. We all know that the more quantities you buy of something, the better of a discount you may get. Better sourcing decisions, improve product quality, and then of course control supplier onboarding. So as we're going in and setting things up, of course, we're going to go through and make better decisions. By making better decisions, we end up with better quality products. And then of course, when we're now purchasing things from our vendors or suppliers, we now know who to use and who not to use. How to get started. So licensing wise, you still need just your standard, you need your standard Windchill author license, and then one of the options at the bottom. So design engine, product engineering, manufacturing process planning, quality management, service parts, or surface information. That is for your internal users. For external users, we can go in and use the Windchill supplier author licensing. That will give them access to interface with Windchill as well. And then some of the must-haves, of course, the must-haves is you must, of course, have a working Windchill environment. We must be having parts already implemented. If not, that is something that we need to go through and implement is the use of WT parts. And then once again, someone to own the data. So once we go through and categorize all this, who's going to set it up? Once we've defined what the classifications are, who's going to do it? Who's going to make changes to it? So I always talk about a librarian when we go through and set things up. Who's going to own setting this information up? Organizational wise, define classification terminology and structure, define definition of approved and preferred. That's what I was mentioning before. What's the difference between the two? They could mean, it is an approved vendor, but out of all the approved vendors, this is the preferred one. And then of course stakeholder buy-in. You want to make sure that anybody that interfaces with this, and of course higher up managers, CEOs, CFOs, all those different people, that they understand the value of doing this, because once again we look at the ROI of data reuse, approved vendors. We know the timetable, so when we're scheduling out our products, we have already set up that the lead time to get this object is 3 weeks. So we already know that because we've inputted that information inside of Windchill, so we actually understand what that is or what that takes. The data, once again, rationalization of existing parts. So if you're already using WT parts, fine, that's great. You're halfway there. It's just now going in and now updating that information as I showed you before. You can have your WT part, now go through and go in and do your classification. Make sure that the appropriate data is inside of there. And then of course, up-to-date supplier records. The one thing I didn't show you is that when you actually still have that um, supplier data, so we have that manufacturer and we have the vendor, that manufacturing file can still have documents associated with it. So we can go through and actually go and have all the specs information associated with that particular one. Or once again, with the vendor, we can have the approval contract that we have with them that is actually associated with that as well. So it's a lot of things that we can go through and set up. Once again, having all that stuff documented so that everything is available. And then nice to have is, once, as we mentioned before, being able to have that bill of material and simply bringing that bill of material out and integrated it into ERP. So that is once again a very nice to have is now have that integration between those two. As I continue to say, the more you put into Windchill, the more you can get out. And now you're controlling it in one location and you're using ERP for specific ERP information and not the stuff that Windchill can control. But once again, that's something that you kind of gauge as to what is doing what. And then the next, of course, what's next? Of course, reach out to me for any additional questions, any implementation information for this. And if you do have questions, as I mentioned before, please reach out. If you have any, if you're going through the PDM to PLM changeover or growth, reach out to us. Let us help you to grow in that direction. So once again, we're not just going to sit here and watch you do it. We want to be an integral part of your growth. So definitely reach out to us so that we can help you to properly integrate or transition from just using Windchill as the PDM environment to a PLM environment and what the steps are. We're not, once again, as they always say, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Yeah, we're not throwing everything at you at once. We're going to work with you to figure out what is the proper way to transition from PDM to PLM.